All right, welcome everybody to week 11, day 1. We're going to be talking today about something called the scope resolution operator. And it basically allows you to pick which the scope resolution operator is double colons. Okay. So if you have the same variable or same name, I guess is a better way of putting it, in multiple scopes, that allows you to pick which one you are talking about. Yep. So you've probably seen it a little bit with stood, right? So if I wanted to see out hello world, this way, this won't compile. Why will this code not compile? What's wrong with this? Just hello world, what's wrong with it? Not return anything? You'd think so. But there's actually a special exception in C++ that main does not actually need to return anything. If you don't return anything from main, it will put a return 0 in for you. So you'll see, very few people know that, actually, but you'd be surprised. Yeah, you actually don't need it. Yeah, so the cout here isn't part of the global namespace. It's part of a namespace called stood or std. And so because I took out the using namespace standard, I can no longer just say cout. If I'm referring to the name, the word, the symbol, however you want to describe it, cout, I need to specify which cout I am talking about. In this case, stood cout. Okay. And this code is still not compiling. Why? What's wrong? I fixed it, didn't I? Stood cout exists now. What's wrong? Yeah, inline is another identifier, symbol, name, word, whatever you want to describe it as, and that also exists within what's called the stood namespace. So does that mean you can make your own cout? Yeah, you could. I wouldn't. Anytime I see the word cout, I'm usually pretty confident that I'm talking about the cout in stood, but I mean, if I wanted to, I could say int cout equals 17 if I wanted to. That this code will compile. Why? Because if I stood cout, I feel like my IQ just dropped about 30 points typing that line out. But if I wanted to cout, this is fine. Why? Because this is referring to the cout in my local scope here. It's unqualified. It's a cout. It's a variable named cout. My throat's kind of seizing a little bit. Like I feel like this clenching in my chest having written that code. If I die, come. Actually, don't revive me because I actually feel that guilty about writing this code. But you can do it. You can do it. You can actually write code this way, and people would probably shoot you for it. But you could. It's valid C++. Is my point. So name all of your ints inline now. Yeah. I'm gonna have a stroke. All right. So we can see out and inline like this. There you go. Of course, if we compile this and run it, it prints out 1752. So, obviously. So could we make our own namespace? Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, a lot of people will recommend that you make, namespace, Kerney. A lot of people recommend that anything you put up in the global space, this area up here, so by default, if you make an int, like int x, this is in the global namespace. And so you could come down here and cout x as well. That works fine. Okay? in general, if you're going to be sharing your code with other people, it's bad to have names in the global namespace. Why? Let's say that you've got a million lines of code and I've just written this cool, new colors library or something. I'm going to share it with you. What's a risk from this? What could go wrong? If I have everything in my global namespace like this, like x is in the global namespace, I can have a function void foo, also in the global namespace. I could have a class called Bob, also in the global namespace. What's the problem? Yeah, what if the people you're giving your code to, what if they have a function named foo? Foo is one of those meaningless words that computer scientists use for functions when we don't have a better name. Like I said, naming things in computer science is one of the hardest things. And so if you just need to come up with a name for a function, foo is like your go-to. And so if you're dealing with somebody who's got a million lines of code in their code base, there's probably somewhere within it a function called foo. And so if they try using your code and they have another void foo, just like that, namespace collision won't compile. Why? Because only one function can have one name with one parameter list. So what I would do is everything in the global namespace, because name conflicts. So what I would do is I would put 3D P, and this is now in the CW Kerney namespace. You understand? So I do that. I put everything into the Kerney namespace and then share that with them. And you can have a variable in the global namespace, right? This X here is this one down here. That variable and this variable coexist just fine because they're in different scopes. The rule is, in C++, the rule is you can have one identifier per scope with the same name. So an X here and an X here is fine. I could also make an X down here if I wanted. That's also fine. Now this X here is using this one. If I didn't have that there, it would use this one. So how do I tell it to use? How do I tell it to use the one in the Kerney scope? What operator do we know about? That's the point of learning today that allows us. I don't want it to print out I don't want to print out the global one. I don't want to print out the local one. I want to print out the one in the Kerney namespace. I want to print out 420. What operator is there to select the X from the Kerney namespace? Yeah, exactly. So it is Kerney : X. Okay. I'm a little bit lightheaded from that horrible thing, but you can see there's the 420 there. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of this. This is killing me. It's absolutely killing me. Right, so this one will be 777. This one is 420. This one's 1290. Yep. And it printed 52 because You guys see why I printed 42052? You guys see that? Yeah, because inline is an integer. Excuse me while I go to the restroom and vomit. Okay, yeah, this is some of the absolute worst code I've ever written in my life. I am so proud right now. I'm so proud. Okay. Okay, so if you want to pick something in the global namespace, you can do this, : like that. So that picks the X in the global namespace. Actually, let me. Okay, you guys understand? Scope resolution operator. You're basically picking which scope the variable is. Okay, makes sense. So the : X means from the global namespace. It's a little weird looking, but so what is a namespace? A namespace is just it's a scope, and it adds the name Kerney to the name of all these things. So if I wanted to call foo, how could I call that foo right there? Its name is not foo per se. Like if I just called foo, let's have it do something, I guess. So if I just called foo, it doesn't compile because its name is not foo. Its name, for all intents and purposes, is Kerney : foo. Yep. So that's how you call it. So when you do a namespace like that, it essentially wraps everything between the curly braces in a namespace. So all of those things have Kerney : effectively appended to their names. And so you select them this way. And the reason why this is nice is that the only thing you have to do now when you're giving your code to somebody else is make sure that your namespace name doesn't conflict with any of their namespace names. And that's just one. Instead of having to worry about every single name in a million lines of code that's in the global namespace, you have to worry about one. And I guess in theory, they could conflict. Like somebody might create like a random namespace for random functions, and somebody else might create a random namespace for random AI behavior. I don't know. You know, like it can still happen, but it drastically reduces the risk that you get a name conflict. Because what happened was you would import, you know, like some AI library, and you'd import like some audio library, and both of those had a function called foo. Can't use both of them now at the same time. Even though they're two different functions, you can't use them at the same time. You can't include the AI code, you can't include the audio code at the same time. Super annoying. And so namespaces, whenever you give code to somebody else, it's generally considered good practice to wrap it inside of a namespace so that the names for your functions don't conflict with anything else they do. Okay? Okay. That's learning point number 1, the scope resolution operator. Learning point number 2. So do you guys understand what I mean by the global namespace? Like all this area just outside of any scope at all. You know, if I make a function, you know, whatever, that's a global function. It's accessible to every function, yeah. Globals are visible to everything, essentially. Okay. Oh, we need to go over the homework assignment too. So let me come back to this. So I will show you the answer they gave me. This isn't my solution to it. My solution I could maybe show some other time. But this is, yeah, and the API key's stale, so don't worry about revealing that. That Dijkstra's version. This is the Dijkstra. It's not the Dijkstra's version. This is the OG version. Okay. Oh no, wait. This is Dijkstra's. Oh shoot. Ah. It's wrong. You guys are CSI 40 bridges. Okay. Sorry, no. CD bridges. Mountains 40 dot reference .cc. Okay, so this is again code not written by me, and a lot of you probably had issues with pointers and things like that. And the good news is, yeah, pointers are hard to understand. They're probably the hardest topic that we talk about in CSI 40. The good news is things like new and delete and pointers. I write code without any of them. I don't write code using pointers. I don't write code using new. I don't write code using delete. In very rare circumstances. In my own personal coding. I don't. I use vectors instead. And let smarter people than me handle the memory allocation. Because, you know, programmers are very cocky, you know, very egotistical sometimes. They're like, I can just keep track of when something needs to be deleted. And the answer really is you can't. When something gets complicated enough, you know, maybe an exception will get thrown, and the loop that you were running within, which had a free after it, doesn't get called because an exception was thrown in the middle of the for loop, and then it bails out some other part of the code, and now you've leaked memory. There's just no... it's basically been proven that humans just aren't smart enough to track it manually. And so by doing things like array, you know, resource acquisition is initialization, RAII, sorry, the RIAA is the Recording Artists Institute of America, or something like that. I don't know. Punishes people for piracy. Yeah, so I don't write code this way. But let's go through it. Because a lot of people do, and you need to know it. That's why I gave you guys this homework assignment, so you can see that, you know, I'm not just making it up, that people, you know, write code using square bracket arrays, you know, stuff like that. Like it's a completely legitimate thing, and lots of people do it. Okay, so this is the heart of the assignment here. Find path. So you pass in some row, and then it starts off on the starting row, and this is the row major ordering algebra that I talked about. So we have a 1D array holding 2D data, and so if we have a row and a column in the 2D thing, we need to figure out which location that is in the 1D thing, and that's the equation right there. And then what it's going to do is get the row and the column from it. It's a bit interesting. Instead of tracking the row and the column separately and incrementing the row and the column and then computing the pix adder from that, instead they just move the pix adder around and then compute the row and the column from it. It's kind of interesting. Okay, so if you want to move northeast, you subtract the image width, right? Because that's the algebra thing. If you subtract image width, that takes you backwards a row -1. And then, so they're going up a row, and then they're going right 1 to get the northeast value. The east value is pix adder to the right. And the bottom right value is you add the width of the image, and that takes you down a row +1. And so, oh, by the way, I need to collect all your homework and then run the cheat checker on it, because the CSI 26 people were given the answer to this. The starting point of their assignment is the ending point of yours. So I need to run the cheat checker and make sure that nobody just turned in the CSI 26 version of this. This is a bug. Pretty sure that's a bug, because they're setting the elevation of the current point to -1 prior to differencing the current elevation with the neighboring elevation. Pretty sure that's a bug in the code. So then they do bounds checking, and so they do bounds checking by special casing out the top row and the bottom row. So if you're in the top row, then they don't read data off the top. And this is the thing that got most of you. The hardest part in this assignment is not going out of bounds. And a lot of you didn't understand that you can't do a square bracket or a dot at without checking first to see if the number inside of that is from the beginning of the array to the end of the array. And so you just try and grab data off the edge of the array, and it would segfault. You're like, why am I segfaulting? Well, you've got a minus somewhere within your at or your square bracket. You have to make sure that the thing exists before you try reading from it, or it'll segfault. Or hopefully it'll segfault. If it just reads whatever's in RAM there, that's even worse. Okay. And then if you're on the bottom row, you don't read down off the bottom of it either. That'll segfault also. Hopefully. Or if you use .at, it'll throw an error. So the solution by the other people, they check to see if they're in the top row, if they're on the bottom row. If not, they're in the middle somewhere, and then they can just grab the east, northeast, and southeast. Now, what they're doing here is they're not actually grabbing the elevation data. These numbers here, that's the index in the array. So it's like saying northeast is at index array element 100, east is at array element 150, southeast is at array element 200. And so these are actually just array indices. That's the index in the array where the elevation data can be found. And so they just store into this array the array indices of all the candidates, and then they count how many candidates there are, either 2 or 3. Okay. You can't ever be in like the bottom right corner, because if you're in the bottom right corner, the map's ended already, because you've already hit the right edge. Okay, so then here is the main code. And so what they do is they have an array. Again, they're using arrays, not vectors. And they're setting each element of the array to be the difference in elevation from the current point. See, that's an index. That's a spot. That's the spot in the array where the elevation data is found. A lot of people just use pix address instead of elev data square bracket pix address. That was a very common mistake that people made. They were just using, 5, like array index 5. The elevation is 5. No, the elevation is elev data square bracket 5. That's the elevation data at index 5. Index is the spot in the array where the data can be found. And so this is the elevation data for our current spot, which is -1, because there's a bug up above. We should have done that afterwards. And it's possible I added that bug. Let me just fix it, because I think this... So now it'll grab the elevation data correctly and difference it with the each of the 3 people. That, again, K is going to be 0, 1, and 2, and so this is getting the index of the 3 neighbors. And then this is a fancy way of doing absolute value. There's absolutely no reason to do that. They could have just used ABS to get the absolute value of this. I would have just put that whole thing with ABS and then all that. This is a ternary operator way of doing absolute value. So if D is less than 0, then it returns -D. Otherwise, it returns positive D. So, a lot of typing to do absolute value. And then they've got a switch statement here where they switch to see if there are 2 candidates or 3 candidates. If there's 2 candidates, then it just checks the 2 to see which one's smaller. And it goes, and that's the direction it's going to move to. If there's 3 candidates, then it compares each of the different pairs. See if 0 is less than 1 and 2, see if 1 is less than 0 and 2, see if 2 is less than 0 and 1. If there's a tie, then it'll flip a coin. And then it just moves the column to the right, and good to go. So that's actually not even used for anything, it's just a counter. Because they directly are changing pixadder. So that's the index in the array. That's moving around. And then they set... That should be here. So after they've already grabbed the elevation data, now we can safely set its value to be -1. And then for the very last element, for the very last column, we will set that to -1 also. Okay, so there's a solution. It's not my solution. I did it differently, without any square brackets and stuff like that. So hopefully you will appreciate not using pointers in this class, because we don't do much in this class with pointers. I do use them occasionally, very occasionally. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with them. It's just, you know, I don't like newing memory. I don't like deleting memory. For me, no news is good news. I don't like when I write code. It's very rare for me to call new, very rare for me to call delete. I will use pointers occasionally, and would have been better to do this assignment using vectors instead of arrays. That's how I did it. That's how I did it. But even still, like, a lot of people were going out of bounds. Why? Because .at doesn't stop you from going out of bounds. It just kills you when you do. Right? If you try accessing .at negative 500, that's out of bounds, you know, and it will kill your program and say you tried accessing an element out of bounds. You still have to do the if statements. There's no escaping bounds checking. And a lot of people just really had trouble understanding you can't just like try grabbing data outside of an array. It won't work. There's nothing there. It's like you're reaching for thin air and trying to eat it. You know, it doesn't work. You have to put an if statement, you know, am I on the northern edge? If so, don't try grabbing data to the north. If I'm on the southern edge, don't try grabbing data to the south. You know, there's no escaping from that if statement. And that was something I just kept finding, like, students would message me, and over again, it was like the problem was they were just reading data outside of the boundary of the array. And I don't know. Okay, so how are we supposed to get around the bug where San Joaquin had -1 values? Great question. So that's something else I want to talk about. The code that was given to me has bugs in it, and I left them in deliberately for you. Why? Because figuring out where bugs are is a skill, and figuring out what's causing crashing is a skill. For most semesters, I don't even tell students, by the way, negative elevation data causes a crash. I ask them to try and figure it out for themselves, but I'd already extended this deadline twice, and it was like, all right, I'm gonna give that one to you guys. That the color code assumes that your elevation is 0 or above. And if you pass in a negative value, it tries creating a negative color, which segfaults inside of their code. Okay? So it's a skill. It's a skill to find bugs and track them down and figure out what's breaking and why is it breaking on San Joaquin, but it's not breaking on Colorado. Like, that's a valuable skill. And there's a lot of ways you can go about it. There's debuggers and things like that. I recommend just starting with couting things. Like, just cout. Like, if it's crashing, figure out where it's crashing. Right? Don't ask me. I mean, you can. Obviously, that's what I'm here for. But before you try asking me, try couting. Like, you know, what I would do is if my code is crashing, and I don't know where, right? I don't know where it's crashing. It could be anywhere within here. It's a lot of stuff. I'd do this. I'd be like, cout before read data. After read data. You know what I mean? Do that around, there's 3 big functions. There's read data, find path, color grid, get image, and then visualize. And so the 3 big ones are get image, find path, and read data. I just put a before and after. And then I'm going to bracket it. And then it's going to be like before read data, after read data, before find path, after find path, before get image. I'm like, oh, it's get image that's crashing. That's interesting. And then I delete then I come in here and I delete you out and delete you out. And then I'm like, okay, I've got it bracketed now. Okay, so I'm going to hop over to get image, and I'm going to start couting, you know, cout I j. And so it'll print all the things that it's, and then it goes boom. Oh, it's exploding on I is equal to 200, j is equal to 300. What's at that address? And so then I will cout the pixel value. All right. You understand? What's going on? Why is it crashing? Very valuable skills. You could spend 8 hours beating your head on this assignment just staring at code. Well, it all looks good to me. You can't do that. You can't just stare at code. You have to like get at why it's crashing and where it's crashing, and if you can reproduce it is valuable also. And so once you start printing out the elevation, and by the way, I went through this process. I did not know they had a bug in their code. I didn't. I loaded up the San Joaquin map and my code segfaulted, which was a weird experience for me because I don't write code that segfaults. On general principle, I don't write bugs. You know, it's a thing that I have. I write code that doesn't have bugs. You know, and the thing segfaulted, and I just stared at it for a second. Like, I have not written code that is segfaulted in a long time. You know, like that's weird. And then I've, you know, later on found out it was their code segfaulting, but still, I called it with a invalid value, which makes it kind of my fault, I guess. So I went through this process. I bracketed, I put it cout before and after, before and after, before and after, deleted it. Or maybe I used a debugger. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It's very fast. Like, you can see how quickly you can just type those things in. And then I found out what point it was crashing on, and I couted the value there, and it was a negative value. And I'm like, oh. Okay. And so, yeah, a simple change would be that. Now it doesn't crash anymore. Because if you have a negative value, it'll still crash on like negative 0.1. All right, so you could fix it to be this. If the value is negative at all, make it blue. And then the whole ocean becomes blue and your path is blue. Or in this case, it'll be purple. I don't know. No, the most proper way of doing this is actually is to add in another case, right? So, yes. So else if the pixel value is less than 0, then make it blue. Let's make it a dark blue, something like that. Okay. That's how you fix it. Handle it. Okay. But the challenge is finding where the crash is and reproducing it. Like, what input is causing this thing to explode? And there's two different places where your code's probably exploding. One was on the color, which wasn't even your fault, sort of. And the other was going out of bounds to the top and the bottom, which is definitely your fault. Yeah. So that's the proper way of fixing it. So let's save this and make sure everything's back in here. All right. Yeah. Do you guys understand that process of like zooming in and finding the point that it crashes? Okay. Another thing you can do is you can add in I just want to make sure this will compile. So another thing you can do is you can add what's called address sanitizer to it. So address sanitizer is a really cool tool that will bounce check everything you do, even square brackets for you. And it's almost better than using .at because it actually tells you which line of code your code went out of bounds on. So put you back in here. Okay. And so what you do is you add that to your thing. Now, if you use compile, if you use compile, it turns on address sanitizer for you, so you don't need to worry about that. Tattoo f sanitize equals address on your arm. Yeah, that is a flag that, as far as I can tell, most computer science professors don't know about and they don't tell people about. But it's really nice because if you go out of bounds, it detects it and it kills your program and it tells you which line of code you crashed on. It's very, very useful. And it's turned on by default for you guys. It's turned on by default, but it's not in the makefile. A makefile is like a more better way of compiling than typing compile. But we'll learn more about that in 41. You don't have to worry about it too much here. Okay, so let's go back into our example here. So scope resolution operator, namespaces. Yeah, okay, so let's do something else. Let's do this, which is called an enum class. An enum class used when you have a fixed list of options for something. So in the previous class, we made like an inventory system for an RPG, because you guys had to make an inventory system for an RPG a couple weeks ago. Still grading those, by the way. And I wanted to show how I would do it, using classes and vectors and stuff like that. And so here's a good learning point. So enum class, item type. So in our role-playing game, we might have weapons, we might have armors, we might have shields, we might have pickle rick, rings, and amulets. So this is kind of akin to doing something like this. Like we could have said const int weapon equals 1, and const int we could have done something like this, right? You guys understand? So we're going to make like an item class. And every item, you know, for every item in the game, it could be a long sword or a short sword or a shield or something. So for every item in the game, it's going to have an item type. And we could have done it like this. We could have said int type like that, you know, and then down in main, when we're making, I'm going to get rid of this horrible mess here. Oh, yeah. One thing I do want to say is that you don't have to use you don't have to use namespace standard for the whole file. You can actually just import using namespace standard just inside of a function. And if you do that, then that works. Okay. Scared of that. Yeah. Do you understand? Or so I don't have to use namespace standard for my entire file. I'm just using namespace standard for main. Or the way that a lot of people recommend doing it is they say using std cout, and then that will allow you to type cout without typing std cout every time. And notice that inline now won't compile because I didn't use std inline. Okay. So you can do this, and this is a way that a lot of professional C++ people code. They don't put a using namespace standard at the top of their code. If they get annoyed by all the STDs everywhere, like we have here, which is brutal, then they'll just manually specify which parts of std they're using. And it's kind of annoying to me because every time you create a new, like if I were to make a vector right now, like if I was to make a vector of ints named vec, won't compile because vector is part of std, so then I have to go using std vector, and it kind of annoys me. I've only been burned by using namespace standard once in my professional career, so I use it. And the risk of using namespace standard is that you're now sort of morally responsible for knowing the names of every data structure and function and global variable and all of std, and not using it. You know, so don't make your own class called vector or whatever. But you know, that's one of the reasons why all of my classes start with capital letter, because everything in std is snake case. All my classes are first letter capitalized. So there will never be a conflict. Like I said, it only came up once, and I stared at it for about 5 seconds in confusion, like, what do you mean it's a redefinition? What? Oh, it's in stood. And then I changed the name. And that was it. So in 10 years, that was the one time that using namespace stood burned me, and it burned me for about 5 seconds. Guess how many times I've forgotten to type stood : when I don't use it. Right. Yeah. I'll compile it, damn it, and go back in, edit it again. You know, the whole use, like, there's a whole debate on it. That's maybe a good compromise. I don't know. Okay, so coming back up here. So if we wanted to make a vector of items, packy. So if I wanted to make a item named longsword, I could set its type like this, right? Longsword dot type equals what? You guys see that? Makes sense? So we've got 5 options for what kind of item. We're not using this yet. I'll get to it in a second. This is how, like, a lot of people write code. Like, they'll have different options like this, and they'll just have a list of constants, and each one has to be different. If you screw that up, oh lord. Yeah, Hazelton's It's Dangerous to Go Alone. I was actually going to find that. I have that saved on my computer. Do you guys understand this? It's like, we want to, like, maybe backpack.pushback longsword. So maybe we're going to have a bunch of items. We're going to push them back into a vector holding your backpack. And then maybe later on we want to go through and get all of the armors. Like maybe you're hit by a rust monster, and the rust monster is going to damage all of the armor you have on you. Then you need to know what type each of your gear is. You know? Do you guys understand what's going on here? Like, we just have an integer for the type, and we're just using a number. You guys get this? Like, we can have other things for the items. We can have static const max health equals 100, and we can have int HP, int damage, screen name. What is item longsword doing? This is creating a new variable, and that's stood name. See what I'm talking about? Super annoying. I'm just gonna toss this back up there. What is item longsword doing? I've made a new class called item. So this describes the items that I'm gonna have in my role-playing game. Right? Like imagine we're playing Path of Exile or something, which is a great role-playing game that is sort of fundamentally broken by a lack of an auction house in it. I ranted about that for about 5 minutes in the previous class. I literally stopped playing it and won't play it until they put an auction house into the game. It's massively frustrating to have a game in which if you want to trade something, the game is based on trading. You have to go to a website run by a third party and find somebody with an amulet you want and whisper them in the game and hope they're online and not in a dungeon, and they have to invite you into your party, and you have to teleport to them, and you have to manually do the trade and then teleport back. Garbage. It's a garbage system. Like, just make an auction house, dude. Seriously. Like, welcome to the year 2020. You know, what is item longsword doing? This is a item. So I've described what all items in my game have. They all have a name, a type. Their health will default to 100%. Their damage will default to 0. Their type will default to, I don't know, armor. Okay, so we can then say longsword's damage is equal to 40. And yeah. And so this is going to add to our inventory. Do you understand what's going on here, Patrick? what item longsword is. I made a class called item, and so longsword is a variable of type item, and so it's a collection of 4 member variables. Okay, it's four member variables, not 5. What is this thing here? What is that sucker? So a constant static is actually attached to the class. It's not attached to variables of that type. So before I even make any items at all, I can see out all items in this world have a max health of. And how do I get this variable max health? I don't have a variable of type item. Like you might think I could do like longsword dot max health, or whatever, do the max health, but I don't have any variables yet. So how can I use some operator to grab a variable out of a scope? I've got a class called item, and I want to get the health out of that scope. Yeah, John has it, item : max health. Just like that. So every item, do you see what I mean by this is attached to the class and not to an object? An object is a variable of class type. Longsword is an object. Item is the class that it's in. And so every item in the world has a max health of 100%. And so I can just grab that way. Does that make sense? I don't have any items in the world yet. And yet I know they have a max health of 100. What do you guys think? Scope resolution operator. You guys are on Discord. You can say things. 16 people streaming right now. I'll pause the recording. So no, there is no constructor for the class, but there is a constructor for the class. When you do something like this, when you give a default value for a member variable, it actually makes a constructor for you. And so the constructor will set HP to 100, type to armor, damage to 0. I like writing as little code as possible. I like using the defaults as much as possible. It makes less code on my part. What do you guys think about this? And this? Useful? Sure. Do you understand the syntax? Cabrera? Giles? Boyles? All you people sitting silently on Discord right now? Do you understand what's happening here? Can you explain the syntax? Yeah. So, this is actually not a member variable. Like, I can't change Longsword's max health because this is actually an attribute of the class. Every item I make in my game has a max health of 100. That's what static means. Static means it's attached to the class. I can actually grab it by saying the class name : max health. It's a static variable. Every variable of that type will share the same max health. And I access it by using the scope resolution operator. So I'm saying item, which is the class, : which max health am I talking about? I'm talking about the max health inside of item. Now, can you say it one more time, please? Which part? Okay, got it. So, one of the problems with this is that weapon is just an integer. So what if I did that by accident? What is my longsword now? Yeah, it's type 11, which means that that doesn't exist. And so none of my if statements that are handling, if type equals weapon, if type double equals armor, if type double equals shield. None of that will work. And in fact, a lot of my code probably won't even, consider the fact that it could be something other than the 5 things we have up there. And so when you have a situation like this where you've got a fixed list of options, a lot of times it just makes sense to use what's called an enum class instead. And so instead of it being an integer, because I don't want it really to be an integer. I don't want to do math on it. I don't want to be able to plus my type or divide my type by 2. Now my armor is a weapon. You know what I mean? Like, it does not make sense for arithmetic to work on a type like that. And so instead of that, I'm going to do this instead. And type is now of type item type. And this means it must be one of these 5 values. And you specify one of those 5 values using the scope resolution operator. So there's 5 possibilities: item type : weapon, item type : armor, item type : shield. This variable here must be one of those 5 things. And if we try doing arithmetic on it like this, item type weapon plus 10, it doesn't allow it. You can't do it. You have to do it like that. You have to pick one of the 5 values. The type system will enforce the property that the type of the longsword must be one of those 5 options, and those 5 options only. What is enum? It stands for enumeration. So you're enumeration. So you are enumerating, which means counting or listing all possibilities for type variable. Okay. So our type variable down here has 5 possible options for it. Item type armor, item type weapon, item type shield, item type ring, item type amulet. Okay. So let's go ahead and add some more stuff to our backpack. So let's make I don't know. Somebody give me an item to make. Cheese. Cheese isn't one of the 5 item types. Staff. Okay, so we'll make item staff. And staff, and let's do this longsword dot name equals. So staff dot name equals staff of power. It's one of my favorite items in Dungeons and Dragons. And then staff dot type is equal to what? What should the type of staff be? Cheese sword. Weapon. How do I type it? What should I type here? Very good. Then how much damage should the staff do? 100,000. Okay. Staff dot damage equals 100,000. There you go. Maybe let's tone it down a little bit. We'll make it 100. It's a little too good. Okay, give me some other item to make. Got a role playing game. So you can make it so like in your RPG you're walking around, you walk over a square, and that square has a longsword in it. Then you can have this code. You make an item, set its parameters, and then add it to the backpack. Right. Get world map or whatever, that sort of stuff. And so you could walk around and collect different items and add them to your backpack. And so the backpack holds every possible kind of item in the game: armors, shields, amulets, whatever. And so every time you walk over a certain square, you clear the square and then add the item to your backpack. Helmet, cheese helmet. Item helmet. Helm.name equals cheese helmet. It's like if you're a Packers fan or something, I don't know. Its damage should be 0, its HP should be 100, and it's already in armor, so that's actually fine. That's all we need to do. What else? Cheese amulet? Sure. Just like that. And we need to set its type. No more cheese, you're left this entire. Okay, so we got the cheese helmet, the cheese amulet. Let's add a body armor. What kind of body armor should we have? Super armor, alright. And it will do, I don't know, body.hp equals item : max health times 2. So it'll start at 200% life. Durability makes more sense. Okay. So the super armor starts at 200% durability. And its type is already armor. Give me one more item. One more item. Cracker's armor. Alright. And so the cracked cracker armor is the code out for us to download. I'll put it up for you. And so this one's not body. This one is ooh. Okay, so then there we go. Do you guys see this? So we can just, make a bunch here. In reality, in the game, you kill a monster, it'll, drop an item, and you can randomly generate an item, and then you just add it to their backpack or something like that. Okay, so we've got all these different things in the backpack. What if we want to just start by just printing out everything in the backpack? How should we do that? What kind of loop should I write? Should I write a regular for loop, a while loop, a range-based for loop? How should I do this? What kind of for loop? Range-based for loop or regular for loop? Yep. So for every item in the backpack, and we're passing it as const reference. Anytime you have a class, you typically pass it const reference unless needed otherwise. So for every item in the backpack, we will cout item.name. So we're just going to print the name of all of our stuff. Behold my stuff. Longsword, Seth Power, cheese helmet, cheese amulet, super armor, and the cracked cracker armor. What do you guys think? A little bit easier to understand than all the pointer stuff? With news, deletes, square brackets, going out of bounds. Yeah. So I'm not going to subject you to that too much more. Pointers aren't fun, but they are useful. Oh, so what I was going to do, and then I'm going to talk about your next homework assignment. What if I wanted to damage all of the armor? Cout, we got hit by a rust monster. And so we want to drop the health of all the armors by 10 or something. How can we do that? Perfect. Item : max health minus minus. You can't modify max health. Item : max health is a constant, right? Perfect. So what we want to do is we want to get all armors in our inventory and reduce all of their health by 10. We need a for loop and we need an if statement. Yeah. So let's do this. For every item by reference in the backpack. Why did I not use const reference? We'd have to create a new health for items. They all have health. And all of them default to 100 health. Okay. So it already exists. I didn't need to type it all in there because it defaults to 100 for all of them. We're changing HP. No need for const. Yeah, if we make it const, we can't change it. We can't damage it because it's const. So we're going to say item. Okay, so if item dot type equals armor. So we're going to go through every object in our. We're going to go through every object in our backpack. If that item is an armor, we're going to damage it. So we'll say item dot health minus equals rand modulus 6 plus 1. So deal 1 dice 6 damage to every armor. If the item's HP is now less than or equal to 0, cout item dot name broke. And let's make it more damage. Let's make it 1d 200. 1 to 200 damage. Okay. And so if that reduced the damage to 0, it'll break, and then we should have more stuff in there to clean it up, but we're running out of time. Do you guys understand this code? So for every item in the backpack, if that item is an armor, we reduce its life between 1 and 200. And if that reduces its health below 0, it snaps. Right now we're just printing it. It broke. Okay. So the cheese helmet broke, the cracker armor broke. However, our super armor survived because it had extra health. You guys got it? No pointers, no news, no deletes, no memory leaks. I'm not smart. I just let the vector handle it for me. When I push back, that's calling new behind the scenes. It's going to be new and stuff, maybe. Who knows? And when it goes away, it deletes all the things. I don't need to know about any of it. It's all handled for me. Vectors are nice. Yeah, we would have to delete it from the backpack. And that might mess up our range-based for loop. So I'm just going to leave it there. It's actually a little bit complicated. Because if you're looping over a vector and you're deleting things as you're looping over it, it can actually invalidate the vectors, iterators, and stuff like that. Let's just ignore that for now. Okay. Let's talk about Pokemon. Yeah, you want a copy of the code. Copy main.cc to public week 11 day 1.cc. So if you guys want a copy of the code for today, to admire, it's right there. Okay. So let's take a look at Pokemon part 2.reference. I was going to show you this because it's actually where this is actually where I non-ironically used pointers. I don't like copy pasted code. I don't like having to write code twice, because if you write code twice and there's a bug in it and you fix it in one place, the bug's still in the other place and it drives me crazy. So I will go out of my way to not repeat myself, right? And so what I do here is, this is combat code for Pokemon. And you have two Pokemon that are engaged in a death match, and I first of all figure out whose turn it is. So if the first Pokemon is faster, it gets to go first. If the second Pokemon's faster, it gets to go first. And so I've got a variable here called P1 turn that's just like, is it player 1's turn? And if it's player 1's turn, it's true. If it's player 2's turn, it's false. So if the player 2 Pokemon is faster, then P1 turn is false. And if they tie, then it flips a coin. So I don't want to. So let's say player 1's first. The player 1 Pokemon is the attacker. The player 2 Pokemon is the defender. After it goes, then the player 2 Pokemon is the attacker, and the player 1 Pokemon is the defender. You guys understand? So it switches back and forth. Who's the attacker? Who's the defender? I didn't want to write code that just copied and pasted all of the code twice. So what I did was I used a pointer. So I had a pointer point at Pokemon 1 if it's Pokemon 1's turn. And defender points at Pokemon 2 if it's Pokemon 1's turn, right? Because the defender is the other person on player 1's turn, right? And then if it's not player 1's turn, then the attacker is Pokemon 2 and the defender is Pokemon 1. So I have these 2 pointers, and then everywhere down here I just use the attacker and the defender. So if I wanted to see out something, you see how there's a little star in front of it, it dereferences it. So basically I've got these 2 pointers, and by default, let's say the attacker is player 1's Pokemon and the defender is player 2's Pokemon. The next turn, the 2 pointers point at the other 2, and then they go back, and they point at the other 2, and they go back. And they just do this. And so all throughout my code, I don't refer to Poke 1 or Poke 2 anymore. I just refer to attacker and defender. So all throughout my code, I just talk about attacker and attacker, get the attacker's name. The arrow here is the dot operator when you have a pointer. So that means attacker dot name, but it's a pointer, so it's attacker arrow name. So Charmander uses, Flame Spin or whatever. Okay. And so, yeah, I only had to copy and paste this code once, or none. I just wrote it once. And then at the end of the loop, I just say, if player 1's turn was true, player 1's turn is now false. If it was false before, it's true now. And then I didn't have to copy and paste my code. I just wrote it once with attacker and defender. And then at the top of the loop, it figures out which one's which. And it just switches back and forth every time. You guys understand? It's a good use for pointers. Like, pointers aren't evil. New and delete kind of are. No news is good news. So if I want to have Bulbasaur, Bulba, and Bulbasaur will have Vine Whip and Solar Beam. If I want to have him fight Charizard with Flame Thrower and Fire Spin, then there's a little portrait of Bulbasaur, and then we got Charizard in there. Charizard's probably going to go first. It's got a higher speed. Yeah, okay, so Charizard will do Fire Spin, and it blows Bulbasaur away, and Charizard wins. The previous class he missed with his attack, and then Charizard was able to defeat them with Solar. Okay, what do you guys think? It's a portrait of Charizard. ASCII art. Yeah, so you're not doing this. You're doing a much easier assignment where your goal is to make a Pokemon. And so you're going to make a class called Pokemon. And inside of the class, you're going to have all the member variables for a Pokemon. So you're going to learn how to make a class. I've given you a list of all the things that describes a Pokemon. Every Pikachu or whatever has a Pokedex number, a name, health, attack, defense, speed, and special. For those of you that have played Pokemon, you're like, no, there's no special. It's special attack, special defense. And you'd be right, except we're doing Gen 1 Pokemon. So Gen 1 Pokemon had special. They didn't have separate special attack and special defense stats. And so you're going to make a class for Pokemon. And inside of here, there is a text file called Pokemon.txt. And it's got all the stats for Gen 1 Pokemon. They're tab delineated. So the format of this file is Pokedex number, tab, name, tab, health, attack, defense, speed, special. And so you are going to have to open a file. You're going to make a vector of Pokemon, and you are going to read from the file and build a vector of Pokemon from it. And that's your assignment. Okay. All the Pokemon. You're going to read all the Pokemon at once, and then the program is going to be all like Pokemon.reference. Do you want to use the Gen 1 Pokemon? Yes. And print Pokemon data. Give me the Pokedex number of the Pokemon whose data we need to print. 68 is Machamp. So Machamp has 90 hit points, an attack of 130, defense of 80, speed of 55, special of 65. It's a fighting type. So that's the assignment. So you're going to have a week to do this. You're going to have to use your file skills. So you're going to have to open up a file, read the data in, and create a vector of Pokemon. Just read into it. And then after you've read into it, then there is no Pokemon battles. There's no explore the world. Don't worry about that part. So all you have to do is print the Pokemon data, like they'll ask for a Pokedex number, and you just type that in, and you print it out. It's 10 points. It's a regular assignment. It's not very hard. Could be 5. Pokemon number 4 is Charmander. Fire type. Here are its stats. Okay. You guys understand? The only tricky bit is that the types are actually in a separate file. So there's actually 2 files you have to open. One is Pokemon.txt, the other is types.txt. And the reason for that is because that's how I got the data. You get to do the same thing I did. I went onto the Bulbapedia and downloaded the data files and put them up on here, and I had to read them same as you. Remember getLine? GetLine allows you to read until a character occurs. All of these files are tab delimited. So you should be doing getLine until a tab, and then that will give you the next chunk of data to read and process. Well, you just want us to print out the Pokemon data, that's it. Load them and print out the Pokemon data. Yep, that's it. So it's gonna exercise everything that we've done in class so far. It's pretty straightforward. You're gonna have to make a class. You're gonna make a vector of. You're gonna make a vector of Pokemon. Somewhere in here. There we go. So there's a vector of Pokemon. And you're gonna open a file and you're gonna load all the data into that. So if statements, loops, functions, classes, vectors, files, everything. We'll bring it all together. Too easy. Seems like a trick. Well, after the last one, yeah, it is. It's a lot easier than the last one. I don't trust them. I'm sure there's something tricky in here. There is. There is. I'll let you figure out which one. I'll let you figure out which Pokemon is different from all the other ones. One of these Pokemon is a little different from the others. And depending on how you do your code, you might not even notice it. But it might explode on one of the Pokemon that has 2 names, 2 words in its name instead of 1. Because if you're doing a double right arrow reads 1 word. And all the Pokemon in Gen 1 are 1-word names except for one of them. I'm not going to tell you which one. But it might be Mr. Mime. Okay? So if your code explodes on Mr. Mime, use getLine instead. Alright? That's it. So just use getLine until a tab. It's way better than using double right arrow. You can probably do this whole thing without using double right arrow at all. But if you do that, or you can mix and match. If you mix and match, you're going to run into problems also. But just remember, if you getLine a number, there's a function to convert between a string containing a number and an integer. So it's called s2i. That's the name of the function. So if you're using getLine for everything, getLine always returns a string. And so you have to use s2i to convert a string containing 301 into the integer 301. So that's the only tricky bit. is Mr. Mime. Other than that, it's a very straightforward assignment. Okay, so Lee, you're absolutely correct. There is one little tricky bit in there, but it's not too bad. Okay, so that's it for today. I will see you guys on Wednesday. Hope you guys had a good time today, and start cracking on the homework assignment. It's better to get stuck early than it is to get stuck late. All right, peace out.